What is up, guys? So I was asked another question. For 200 bucks you can get the Bold M1 or you can get the LG G7, and which phone should you get? I really love both these phones, so it's really tough, but let's go ahead and break it down and see which phone would be best for you. Now let's go ahead and look at the hardware. So the hardware is actually very premium on both these guys, especially for the Bold for being 200 bucks. They're both glass and metal designs, and they both look really nice. So you've got dual camera setups on both flash. The LG G7 has the fingerprint scanner on the back. You have the fingerprint scanner on the Bold M1 built into the display, and on the sides of the device you have the Google Assistant button. On the Bold you have the power volume rocker, and then on the G7 you have the volume rocker and the Google Assistant button. On the bottom you do have USB Type-C on both, one single firing speaker and a 3.5mm headphone jack. Now the LG G7 is water resistant, so that's a really great thing with the hardware. It's IP68, so if you drop it in water for 30 minutes, it'll survive that drop. So let's go ahead and talk about the display. So I'm going to start off with the G7. It has an IPS LCD display. It's very bright and it's a very nice display with a very high pixel density. So at 564, it's extremely high. It almost looks like somebody painted on it. That's the best way I can describe it. It has a 1440p display, 1440 by 3120, and that's just a really nice display. I always love it, and you also have that always on function as well. So the Bold M1, it has a really good display as well. It's a full screen display, no notch like the G7. It is a full 1080p display, 1080 by 2340, and it is an AMOLED display. And it is a 403 for the PPI, and it looks really good as well. One of the weird things about the Bold is there's no always on display on here, which is pretty weird, so I guess that's to preserve battery life, but it is what it is. Now, as far as getting into both devices, there's more options on the G7, as in you can use the fingerprint scanner, works very fast, no problem, and you can also use the face unlock, and that works really good. You can use the built-in fingerprint scanner, but you actually can't use the pop-up motorized camera on the Bold M1 to unlock the phone. So you're limited to that or the pin pattern. Now when you're watching videos on both devices, you do have a big display on the Bold M1 at 6.4 inches, and you do have a 6.1 inch display. So it is a little bigger, and you can notice. Now the thing is, this is where you're gonna have to make a decision. It really comes down to the resolution. So you have 1440p, and it does look much better, a little bit more crisp, and it just gives off a really good image, a high resolution image. The Bold M1 looks great, but you don't have to deal with that notch, and you don't have to deal with that notch with gaming either, which I really love as well. So that's a decision you're gonna have to make. But as far as both displays, they both look really good, but in 1440p you're always going to prefer that over 1080p. Now let's go ahead and test out the speaker quality on both. Start off with the the G7. So as you can see, the G7 is louder and the clarity is a little bit better. That's one of the weaker areas on the Bold M1, is definitely the speaker. It's not the best, but the G7 is definitely better, but it is a pretty decent speaker. So you're running Android 9.0 on both these guys, and with the G7 you actually have the Snapdragon 845 with the Adreno 630, and you also have 4 GB of RAM and 64 GB of storage with micro SD support up to 1 TB with the G7. So very impressive for this older flagship. So the Bold M1 has the Helio P70 processor along with 4 GB of RAM and 128 GB of storage. You can also expand that with micro SD up to 128 GB, which is really nice. Now for the cameras, you do have a 16 megapixel wide on the G7 and a 16 megapixel ultra wide along with a 8 megapixel front facing camera. Now on the Bolden one, you actually have a 16 megapixel camera and a 5 megapixel depth sensor, along with a that motorized pop-up camera that is 13 megapixels. So both these cameras take pretty decent photos. The G7 takes better photos. The Bolden one kind of struggles. If you put Gcam on it, which the port doesn't really work that well, but there's a workaround it if you check out my video on the channel. The G7 just takes better images. You get better color, sharper, and you actually have that ultra wide as well, which is really nice. And I think most people will really like that. Here's another picture of the trees. You can see big difference with color, but they both keep clarity. It's just the Bolden one image processing, when you kind of zoom in, does not keep as much clarity as the G7. And I've noticed that low light photos on the G7 are also really good as well, with the Bolden one kind of struggles a little bit. Now that pop-up camera on the Bolden one is very, very cool. It's one of my favorite things about the phone. You can really do that all day. Very cool. You can even change these sound effects. But you know, for camera, you know, the G7 has a better camera, the front and back facing camera. You gotta remember, it is last year's flagship, so it's not gonna have a bad camera at all. Now this is usually a deal breaker for a lot of people. So you got Bluetooth 5.0 on the G7. You also have NFC, so that's a big thing for people. And the Bolden one also, the Bolden one does not have NFC, and it has Bluetooth 4.1, so that could be a big deal breaker for you. Now for battery life, you're getting about the same amount of battery life. With the Bolden one, you have a 3,500 milliamp battery with 18 watt fast charging, and you actually have wireless charging with this guy as well, which is pretty cool for the price you pay. You have a 3,000 milliamp battery on the G7, 18 watt fast charging, and you also have wireless charging as well. So you're getting about a day of battery life on both phones, which is pretty good, so I'm not complaining on either phone. So overall, both phones are really great. You kind of have to compare and contrast and see what you care about and what you don't care about. So thanks for watching this video. Hopefully I was able to help, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.